Well, thank you for that warm welcome. As some of you know, a big part of my research involves exploring the consequences and even values of paradox. So I'd like to extend an invitation to all of you to dwell with me in paradox, if only for a few moments, to better understand how we might sustain empathy through the paradoxes of pain. Medical encounters start with a story. Therefore, I'd like to begin with a series of overlapping narratives. Before I do so, I want to point out that some of these stories are cloaked in tragedy and contain themes of death and suicide. And it is in this context that I want to introduce to you the person you see displayed on the screen. This is Liv Leifs. She was born on August 20th, 1929 in Iceland to Annie and John Leifs. Her father was perhaps the most famous composer to emerge from the island nation. Now, Liv was an aspiring violinist and an avid swimmer. But on July 12, 1947, while attending a summer camp in Sweden, Liv entered the frigid waters for what would be her last swim. 9 days later, her body was retrieved by a passing sailor. According to the historian Arne Ingolfsson, the harrowing question, and one that would remain unanswered, was whether Liv had meant to take her own life. In the wake of this unimaginable horror, her father turned immediately to composing and rapidly completed his Requiem, a work unlike any other in his career, for a loss unlike any other in his life. And I want to play a brief excerpt of this for you now. This piece that you just heard is saturated in contradiction. The harmony shifts back and forth between bright major keys and dark minor keys. The harmony, the rhythm itself has this swaying feature which seems to take us back and forth, and yet the bass line grounds us and actually prevents forward progression. And if we take a closer look at the lyrics, the paradoxes are only further magnified. The title, highlighted here in green, suggests the traditional Latin text. Yet Liv juxtaposes this with lyrics that are stitched together from Icelandic folk poetry. The excerpts highlighted in yellow are illustrative of his allusions to nature, while those pictured in blue contribute to the feeling of a lullaby, marked by a shift to the first-person perspective, sleep, I love you. There is one final paradox. Leif's daughter was born in the wake of his father's death. The couple thus chose to name her Liv, which in Icelandic means life. It is thus fatefully ironic that someone born amid tragedy could be a catalyst for suffering through her untimely death. I want to switch gears for one moment by zooming out to another event that took place around this time. It was in the 1940s that Thomas Lewis published a book on the mechanisms of pain. In it, he wrote, "I am so far from being able to define pain. Pain is known to us by experience and described by illustration." The near concurrence of these events mirrors another simultaneity that occurred at the beginning of the 20th century, when the Norwegian composer Edvard Grieg wrote a similar choral work in the midst of his despair. And it was then that the most famous neuroscientist, Charles Sherrington, coined the term synapses, meaning to fasten together. So what do all of these stories have in common? On the surface, seemingly nothing. But if we look just a little deeper, we will discover a common problem each of these figures faced. It is that their work was motivated by the paradoxes of pain. For thousands of years, we have struggled to understand pain. What causes it? What stops it? Just what is it? And yet, as Lewis rightly noted, pain is something that is known to each one of us. We feel it. We suffer under it. We run from it. Sometimes we even run to it. Pain, it seems, is an inescapable enigma of humanity. But what I want to suggest is that our disregard of another question has resulted in many deleterious consequences. What does pain mean? Over the course of our lives, pain often forces us to suffer twice. First, from the onset of uncomfortable sensations, and second, through this loss of meaning. Thus, while the last century has witnessed many groundbreaking achievements in treating pain, the shift in authority to biomedicine has not yet been accompanied by an equally extensive gain in our understanding of pain's many meanings and their relevance to our identity. For instance, after being diagnosed with prostate cancer, the writer Anatole Broyard penned an article in which he pleads not for a cure, but for new meaning for this disease, stating, "I'd much rather think that I brought it on myself than that it was a mere accident of nature." A common strategy, then, for granting significance to pain on both the part of the sufferer and those who bear witness to suffering has been to measure it. But that process raises even more issues. Most recently, Stephanie de Montague authored a book on her journey through chronic pain, in which she lamented the limitations of quantifying pain, especially using pain scales. Her skepticism echoes that of many others, including Eula Biss, who candidly acknowledged, quote, "Pain presents a unique problem in terms of measurement. Assigning a value to my own pain has never ceased to feel like a political act. This exercise itself is painful." Given this impasse, then, what do we do? How can we help others to find meaning for their pain? There is no singular answer to this question, but I submit that we can develop a repository of strategies for palliating pain's negative effects and perhaps even find value in it by grounding our efforts in two key propositions. The first comes from the noted pain scholar David Morris, who recognized the paradox that, quote, "Our biochemistry is inextricably bound up with the personal and cultural meanings that we carve out of pain." Following from this is the second proposition, and it is that because pain is cultural, it holds the potential to be shared. In other words, to paraphrase the writer Spider Robinson, joy shared is joy increased. Pain shared is pain lessened. In her book, The Story of Pain, Joanna Burke argues that the body is never pure soma. It is configured in social, cognitive, and metaphorical worlds. Burke contends we need to avoid falling in the trap of treating pain as an independent entity. Pain is thus infinitely shareable. Now, her research requires us to imagine a different type of synapse than that which Sherrington described more than a century ago. I argue that it demands a network of what might be termed aesthetic synapses. To this end, I think Leif's Requiem is a powerful reminder of those elements that I earlier framed as conflicts, such as that unsettled harmony and those conflicts with the rhythm. They can actually be read as complements. It also encourages us to consider the value that is created by placing the arts not below biomedical approaches, but beside them, thereby making these epistemologies complements too. The geographer and climatologist M. Jackson offers a contemporary vision of what such an approach might look like in a pair of publications released in 2019, which bear an uncanny resemblance to the strategies employed by Leaves. Like the composer, she tethered her pain from the loss of her family members to collective narratives surrounding the environment. In While Glaciers Slept, she writes, "I have always fled back to Alaska after experiencing breakable pain. This landscape protects me." In The Secret Lives of Glaciers, she likens her journey through pain to the scars created by climate change, which she observed while in Leif's homeland of Iceland. She concludes, "We can have the very best data. But if that information is not grounded within the human stories of place, then that information is largely powerless. If people do not see the selves in that story, then they are not a part of that story." Taken together, Jackson's works serve as the foundation for creating what I call ecologies of suffering, shared spaces that enable one to create meaning out of the subjective experiences of pain, including those precipitated by the loss of climate, community, family, and even self. Jackson's reflections provide an excellent metaphor for not just sustaining empathy, but amplifying it in clinical settings. And here I can think of no better framework than that offered by Stephen Buteau, the professor of primary health care. By integrating science and the humanity, Buteau's paradigm conjures up ways to transform the relationship between patients and healthcare professionals into one guided by shared humility and one that collaboratively co-produces meanings from pain across settings and time. We will never know the cause of Leif's death. It is a life and loss shrouded in uncertainty. But amid the hazy horizon of grief, the fuzzy network of belonging, the porous boundaries of disciplinary power, and even the evaporating rim of a glacier's edge, John Leifs teaches us how to trace borders around the invisible shape of pain, even as he places his daughter to bed for the last time. Yet these are not borders that are narrow and confining, but margins that grow ever wider and expansive due to the liberating potential of shared meaning-making. In works like the Requiem, this process becomes not an ideological fantasy, but an epistemological reality. In some, they teach us how to build a tolerance for uncertainty, not by evading it, but by embracing it. According to Paul Hahn, senior scientist with the National Cancer Institute, this is the profound paradox of uncertainty. It represents both our greatest liability and our greatest asset. It is both the bane of our existence and the precondition for a meaningful life. The core problem of medicine and our lives more generally is to somehow accommodate this paradox. So I've asked you to dwell in paradox because to do so, I believe, is to reside in a place of possibility. Pain, to paraphrase the disability scholar Joel Reynolds, is a command to reorient ourselves. And to that, I would add, it also enables us to sustain empathy by coming together in our common role as artists. For those in the visual domain, their primary medium is space, which they fill with paint or perhaps clay. For musicians, their primary medium is time, which they fill with sound. But as for all of you physicians, I want to suggest that your primary medium is uncertainty, that you fill with meaning. And as science using artists of uncertainty, you have the amazing capacity to lean into discomfort, to co-construct meaning, and hold your patient's hand as you face uncertainty head-on together. seeing each process as a pathway for reimagining the self in relation to our community and the environment. Given this transformative potential, there is no corner in which pain could hide from our common will to endlessly appreciate the aesthetic power of our shared humanity. Thank you.